Welcome to the NerdGoblin podcast.
Welcome to the fourth episode of the NerdGoblin podcast. For the first-time listeners out there, this is a weekly podcast in which we will cover various topics from television and movies to video games, technology, and whatever else we find interesting in a given week. For returning listeners, thanks for your support. We're just getting a little bit better every week. My name is Jonathan, and joining me as always are Bill and Guy. Let's get started.
This is the news.
Okay, we're going to start with news, as we tend to do these days, and today the first news topic is going to be Bandai Namco and their exciting announcement for the home. Starting in June, individuals can order the Star Wars Battlepod arcade console for your home for the low price of $35,000. A luxury model is available for $100,000 that features leather seating and exclusive carpet. This console weighs 1,200 pounds. Can we expect your couch to hit the curb and one of these to dominate your living room? Guy?
Don't forget that on the $100,000 model, you also get your name that rolls across the screen in the credits, so that's a little bit of added value. But, seriously, I thought of a good idea for these things. I'm going to go ahead and get 2 of them, and my wife and I can use them to battle each other as a means to solve disagreements. You know, whose turn is it to do the laundry? Whose turn is it to clean the dishes? Seems like a really practical way to solve those problems. But in all seriousness, it's a space combat flight simulator. You know, it looks pretty cool. I saw some gameplay videos, and it's not a bad-looking game. You know, who hasn't always wanted to fly a TIE fighter? If I was a super rich Star Wars fan, you know, maybe I might buy one. There's tons of silly luxury items that people spend money on. The Apple Gold watch, what's that, $17,000 comes to mind. So sure, ultimately it's an arcade thing, and I don't expect a lot of people are going to have these in their homes, but George Lucas will probably have one.
Have we had a format change on the podcast? Are we appealing to the one percenters now? I guess when I get my ruby-encrusted leash for my pet tiger, this sort of thing might have a greater interest to me. But that said, I think there's at least 2 interesting sort of tangents off of this topic. And, number one is the relevance of the arcade in modern society. I mean, when I was a kid, I went to arcades all the time, dropped quarters in them. I imagine they're up to dollar coins now. What is the exact relevance of arcades anymore, as an entertainment source? And then I suppose the second thing is that there are, in fact, both custom constructed, and you can have them made, basically gaming desks, gaming enclosures that, are meant to be used with high-end video cards, multi-monitor displays, high res, various, controller inputs, throttles and flight control joysticks and the like. And people do spend a fair bit of coin on that. I doubt you could, really reach the $35,000 level, even if you tried, just going through all those other things. But, it does point out that there are interesting uses for parallel aspects of this sort of technology.
Yeah, my favorite thing about that was that you were complaining about the 1% and you can't be bothered to know the current denominations of coins. But, to kind of expand on what you were saying, Dave & Buster's is making all the money with these arcade consoles. Their theme is basically adults, and, you can get a drink, you can eat, and then you can go play some video games. And I think that's where these are, if I remember reading in the article correctly, for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, just this past weekend, my wife and I took our nephew to Chuck E. Cheese's. It's filled with arcade games. Interestingly enough, it seems like maybe somebody that owns casinos is funding these Chuck E. Cheese's, because 95% of the games in there very strongly resemble gambling games. But I think that's another tangent for a different discussion.
Maybe a little bit of tinfoil hat action going there.
It feels like gambling, though. My son, when he goes to Chuck E. Cheese, I'm just pleading with him not to pay the game for 50 cents, where he literally just pulls a lever in hopes of getting somewhere between 10 and 15 tickets that he can buy a stick of gum with. We maybe can move on from this. This is something that is obviously not going to be a common thing. If any of our listeners plan on buying one of these or have any, experience with one of these, and maybe at a Dave & Buster's, let us know what the experience was. Send us an email at nerdgoblin@gmail.com. And let's move on to the next point, which is a Finnish studio called Future Play, and their new concept for mobile games, View to Play. In this concept, instead of using the pay-to-play model, users of their apps have to watch advertisements, which will then unlock currency or game time. There have been a few advertising-driven marketplaces before, but this is the first I've heard of a company making this their entire revenue stream. Thoughts, Bill?
Yeah, so, I mean, this is certainly probably one of the first times that someone's making it so direct, and, at least in the gaming industry. There have been other examples, and probably two of the best that I could name. Both are offshoots of formerly Perfect World, and now Arc Entertainment, the publisher-developer of both Neverwinter and Star Trek Online. They used to do a similar thing where you could earn Zen, which was their in-game currency, by signing up for, applying to, and completing surveys that would take, anywhere from 5 minutes to potentially even 20 or 30 minutes to complete. And you'd gain a little chunk of, in-game currency for doing that. Of course, this does begin to beg the question as to what the value of your time is worth, because, you could very easily, for about the same amount, plunk down, $5, $10, even up to $20, and gain the same thing, depending on, what the value of your money is.
Yeah, I gotta say, when it comes to gaming and having to watch two 30-second commercials every 15 minutes, I'm just out. I'm not interested in being a part of that revenue model. I'd rather just pay the cash that I'm going to pay and get the game that I'm going to get. I remember seeing an article going back a couple years now. Square had taken a couple of their games and ported them directly to browser-based apps, and you could play them with the catch of having to watch advertisements to get game time. Like I said, I'm just not interested in it, and I think it's probably a bad idea. Most people don't like to be advertised to so obtusely, and I think it's going to be a negative model to use for these games. So, yeah, I'm going to pass.
Let me do my obligatory reference to my son and his terrible gaming habit, but, he has no problem watching these videos. The games that he plays are all currency-based, and anytime there's a video that he can't click play on in order to get 10 coins, he's down to do that. And I don't know if that's because he's 5, or if it's because it's something he's kind of been trained to do so far.
Yeah, maybe it's because he's not qualified to have gainful employment yet. Or, for that matter, if it's legal in this country. I suppose you could send him to some places around the Pacific Rim where it's a little more embraced. But, this overall model is not something that's new to us as consumers, as, people who enjoy entertainment. I mean, television has been doing this to us, for longer than I can remember, into the 50s and 60s. It was entirely funded, by television, by advertising. So you're forced to watch a 30-second commercial, a minute-long commercial, a 45-second-long commercial in order to, essentially pay for the entertainment you're receiving, on the TV. Now, the difference is that we've grown accustomed to using this as a sort of built-in break to our television watching habits. That's when the commercial comes up, you head off to the bathroom, you head off to the fridge, you flick, through some channels and see what else is on. You make a phone call, etc. I'm wondering if maybe this is just going to lead to a gaming sort of example of this, and we're going to take breaks from our gaming instead of actually watching the commercials.
I don't know about you, and maybe it's just the way my house is laid out, but I feel like I'm really unlikely to go ahead and get up from my computer chair and walk across the house to the kitchen or the bathroom every 15 or 20 minutes if we're going to a full commercial mode to, continue playing our gaming. Just something that I don't think I'm going to do. But, it brings up the point that as long as I can remember, we have found ways to circumvent advertising on television. I mean, I used to sit in front of my TV with the Betamax recorder recording Saturday morning cartoons, holding a controller that was physically wired into the Beta VCR machine, and, I would push stop and record and skip all the commercials, and I'd have tapes full of Looney Tunes, without the commercials. In modern days, we have DVRs and other, less reputable ways of getting your TV fix through the internet. And, in all of these things, people use those to circumvent commercials. I assume that hackers or apps are going to be built in order to circumvent having to be forced to be advertised to in these cases as well.
Guys' point there makes me want to take this to a really meta place and talk about this for longer than we should. It's basically a fight the machine thing with the advertisers. We're trying to get out of watching advertisements, but it's really just a tolerance level. And I think that the thing that Future Play is doing that's interesting is, one, they're getting publicity for themselves just by posting this, which has made the rounds in a lot of the gaming websites. And the other thing that they're doing is they're just being upfront, like, hey, we're going to make you do this, and hopefully you're okay with it. Whereas everyone else has just kind of snuck it in a little bit. It's like product placement that for a while we saw in movies, and it seems to have faded away a little bit for some reason, like maybe because of backlash or whatever. But I personally would hate to think of a time that instead of maybe a DLC for a video game that we want to play, there are either product placements or built-in ads.
Well, Transformers was nothing but one General Motors product placement ad for 2 hours, right?
Yeah, the most recent one, those make all of the money overseas, not so much domestically, but, China and Japan, they just love the movies for whatever reason. Was the most recent one the same thing, like a giant GM commercial?
Oh, I couldn't tell you. I only watched the first one.
Wasn't the James Bond movies, particularly the recent ones, renowned for being like an Audi commercial? And what's that, Watchmaker? Weren't the watches product placement very conspicuous in those movies?
Yeah, I think that they were. We'll have to keep an eye on this. Let's just do, a community watchdog group and make sure that we're not being overly advertised to, and move on. Let's talk about Marvel. We have to talk about Marvel every week. And what caught my attention this week was a kind of under the radar feud between Fox and Marvel that people that are really into the Marvel products are probably very aware of, and I was not. The Fantastic Four and X-Men franchises, the movie rights to those are owned by Fox. Marvel wants them back. Fox will not give them to them. And Marvel is doing some things that, might be a little underhanded. Let's give the listeners a little bit of background on this, Guy.
Yeah, that's rumors that have been going on for years, but basically Marvel sold, the movie rights to a lot of their IPs over the course of the years when they were struggling financially back in the late 90s and early 2000s. In this case, Fantastic Four and X-Men went to Fox, Spider-Man went to Sony, and, all of the other Daredevil, Ghost Rider, and other characters went to different studios. So anyway, once the comic book based movie genre started getting big, Marvel wanted to get their properties back, and then Marvel was bought by Disney, which only increased their desire to capitalize on these multi-billion-dollar franchises. So what they've been doing, theoretically, possibly a rumor, possibly true, is sort of tanking these titles in the comic book medium, like X-Men and Fantastic Four. For example, I looked on Diamond Distributors' website, who is the company that does all of the distribution handling of comic books, and there's no Fantastic Four issues being distributed in June, July, or August. So maybe Marvel is trying to tank those titles a little bit, but here's the bottom line. Fox made comic book movies a thing in 2000 with the first X-Men movie. Prior to that, there was a series of flops of Batman comic book based movies, and they were terrible. And Fox came along and took a risk and made this X-Men movie, and it was fantastic and made a lot of money. And shortly thereafter, Sony did Spider-Man, and it just spun off into this golden age of comic book movies. So they deserve a little bit of credit, and maybe Marvel should be thanking them instead of fighting with them.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. But of course, number one, they want their property back. And number two, and maybe this is like sort of the undercurrent to all of this, is I think a lot of the fans want to see Marvel get their property back. I mean, not for nothing, I'm sure this is a topic for debate, but I think a lot of people feel that the Marvel IP and produced and directed movies, like the Iron Mans, the Captain Americas, the both Avenger movies, were just a lot better done and a lot more successful. Even if you look at Daredevil on Netflix, and that's considered very successful and very, highly entertaining, I think people want to see the art done by the best artists. And while I wouldn't necessarily call the X-Men movies any kind of failure, like you mentioned, I think they really launched the success of the whole genre. But I think that they lost something along the way and saw themselves and their model get improved upon in a way that now they're the ones playing catch up.
Yeah, the latest X-Men movie, which was a success commercially, I was not at all interested in. They had some characters that I thought was interesting that they included, but just time travel as a plot device, I can take a pass on that, even though I know it's a big thing in the comic book universe. My entire comic book enjoyment is based on the 90s X-Men cartoon series. Like, that's what got me into it. That's still my favorite. And so I would much rather see the X-Men than the Avengers on screen. But I don't really enjoy the Fox movies. You know, I would definitely, as Bill said, like to see Marvel take control of that again and put the writing and the resources behind the X-Men franchise that they put behind the Avengers franchise.
I don't think that's ever going to get back to the Marvel, to be honest. Whether or not Fox is making the best X-Men movies, and without a doubt, they are not making the best ones. They are successful. You know, they're commercially viable. They're making money on them. It'll be interesting to see what happens with this next Fantastic Four movie. We've theoretically kind of had 2 flop Fantastic Fours, and the next one that's coming out looks to be pretty terrible. So Fantastic Four might get reverted back to Marvel, but I don't see X-Men going back to Marvel.
One of the biggest things that we're missing out on as fans is the crossover stories. I mean, that's historically something that's like really big in comics, and I'm not saying this from any position of expertise, but it's something I've noticed that, you know, these crossover stories where you get the Avengers with Spider-Man, the Avengers with the X-Men, you have these various plot lines and stories that really can't be developed for the big screen because the IPs of originally being Marvel's property are now all competing with one another for our entertainment dollars.
Yeah, that's true, and that actually brings up the point that we have seen now some crossover, despite the fact that the properties are owned by different movie studios. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver did appear in the Avengers 2 Age of Ultron movie. However, you'll notice they never referred to them as mutants. They called them enhanced, I think was what the term was that they used in those movies. But somehow they worked out a deal with Fox in order to have those 2 characters appear in this Avengers movie. Also, Spider-Man is allegedly going to appear in the next Captain America Civil War movie, so they've worked out a deal with Sony there. So we're seeing some of those crossovers starting to happen.
Yeah, so actually what you mentioned there, like about a deal in order to use Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, that was anything but a deal. That was pure spite. Basically, these characters sort of fall in a no man's land that aren't covered by the contracts, unless, of course, like you mentioned, they're referred to as mutants, or if they're referred to as the children of Magneto, which is currently Fox property. Now, what's going on there is that, you know, this is a Marvel trying to pee on their territory, really. They're trying to establish that, like, you know, a devaluation of a product that Fox holds, or at least that's one way to interpret it, and then the flip side of this is I've read rumors that originally the Quicksilver role in Days of Future Past was added in at the very last moment, and that it was actually supposed to be Juggernaut that played in that same sort of slot in the plot line, and they removed it and put Quicksilver in the moment that they heard that Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch were going to be used by Marvel in their upcoming Avengers movie.
That's funny. It's like jaded girlfriend fighting with ex-boyfriend kind of material going on there.
Yeah, you know, let's wrap this around to something that's going to be topical this summer, which was the Fantastic Four movie. You know, the fact that Marvel isn't the maker of this movie does create a little trepidation for me, but the fact that they have Miles Teller, Michael B. Jordan, and Kate Mara as members of Fantastic Four, as opposed to actors like Chris Evans and Jessica Alba, I mean, those are major actors. Those are good actors. And, you know, I think maybe even if their writing's bad, that acting quality is going to carry the movie to an extent.
I mean, who was Chris Evans before becoming, you know, Human Torch in the first Fantastic Four movie? Did we know who he was?
I don't know. If I did, I probably wasn't happy about knowing who he was. But, you know, let's just think about the fact that even though this isn't Marvel and Disney making this movie, they're getting... I'm not going to say A-list actors, but Michael B. Jordan was nominated for an Oscar. Miles Teller was nominated for an Oscar, I believe. And, you know, Kate Mara just got off of the incredible fame of the Netflix series. Help me out here.
No idea.
No idea. Can't help you.
Oh, come on. The political one with...
House of Cards.
Yeah. So there we go.
I don't know if this is true, but I heard a rumor that the screenings of the first cut of the Fantastic Four movie were so bad that they had to go back and rewrite and refilm a significant portion of it. You know, I saw early interviews, or I guess read technically early interviews with Kate Mara and the director, where they were talking about this isn't a superhero movie, these are just kids that have problems. It was effectively going to be The Chronicle Part 2. I believe it's the same director that did that movie. It was just random troubled teens with odd powers and stuff. I can't see this being good in any way, shape, or form, unless they totally started over and said we're making a comic book movie. Because that's what I'm expecting to see. The title's Fantastic Four, for God's sake.
You know, if I was a rational person, that probably should have scared me off, but I'm definitely still going to go see it in the theaters, so I can let you guys know so you don't have to waste your money. Let's move on, though. We talked in an earlier podcast about eSports a little bit, and we mentioned the Heroes of the Storm tournament that was aired on ESPN2. What we did not mention was Colin Cowherd, a sports radio personality, viscerally ripping the idea of a video game on ESPN. He had numerous lovely quotes, such as, "Somebody lock the basement door at Mom's house and don't let him out," and "That was the equivalent of me putting a gun in my mouth and having to listen to that." And finally, "I tagged out at Harry Potter." Discuss, Bill.
Yeah, you know, I have to confess, number one, I'm not a terribly big esports fan. I mean, I am a video gamer, and if anything, I mean, I've been a classical sports fan, you know, for most of my adult life. But that said, I'm insulted by it. I mean, number one, I see his commentary as being very close-minded about the entire topic. He's trying to, like, you know, establish the validity of his own enterprise. I mean, think about it. In a manner of speaking, he's nothing more than a much, much more successful version of what we're doing with our podcast. Except he's talking about sports and we talk about video games and movies. What is the difference in the actual validity of either subject matter? They're both very successful forms of entertainment amongst the proper crowd. So, I mean, I feel like Colin really dropped the ball on that one and literally on his own foot.
I looked it up, so here's the definition of the word sport. An activity involving physical exertion and skill, in which an individual or team compete against one another for entertainment. Based on that, in the true sense of the word, esports are not a sport, but you know what? Neither is poker, billiards, darts, and a host of other things that are televised on ESPN. All of those activities are games. They're all entertaining and competitive games, though. They require skill and they're popular activities, and you know they have large fan bases that are, you know, big enough to sustain television viewership. Does it belong on ESPN? Why not? The Learning Channel has Here Comes Honey Boo Boo and My Strange Addiction, so esports might as well be on ESPN for all I care. In regards to Colin Cowherd, you know, I listen to him kind of often when I'm driving in the car, especially during football season, and I like him. I think he's a good radio personality. But I definitely don't always agree with him, and he can be a bit of a self-absorbed egomaniac. I mean, if you ever listen to him, clearly he only cares about his own thoughts and interests. In this case, it's just a case of him being a closed-minded dumbass, and, you know, sometimes you can't fix stupid.
You know, I follow ESPN quite a bit. I still click on the ESPN link to go and check the scores of my sports and whatnot, but I've got to admit, I'm not a big fan of them these days. I'd like to find another option, because recently they've decided to part ways with someone that really promoted the idea of me starting and us starting this podcast, a guy named Bill Simmons, who really was on the cutting edge of the podcast floor, and he has, you know, a nice voice, and he speaks his mind, and, you know, one of the reasons they let him go is because he spoke his mind. Now, he didn't reference suicide and, you know, literally alienate an entire group of people like Colin Cowherd did, and Colin Cowherd didn't get any discipline for this. He got press, and his irrelevant radio show got a little bit more coverage. And, you know, I say that totally agreeing with you guys on this topic. But I want to point out that before this, I enjoyed Colin Cowherd. I think he's very intelligent. If I was going to ever listen to pick advice around a football game or who was going to win the NCAA tournament, the guy has just a remarkable success record with predicting these things.
Yeah, so another ESPN personality, Michelle Beadle, and I'm getting this actually directly from ESPN's site, SB Nation. She, on her Twitter, she wrote, "No joke, these announcers are killing it. I don't have a damn clue what I'm watching, but they won't let me leave." And that's as she's watching this Heroes of the Storm tournament, which, you know, again, is what Cowherd's rant was entirely about. And just as another aside, according to the website, quote unquote, it should be noted that Beadle's adorable pug is named Leroy Jenkins, presumably after the well-known World of Warcraft meme. Now, this is someone who, she understands that this activity is just as legitimate within its context and amongst its audience as billiards or darts or golf or football or baseball. The level of success might have some impact on, the marketability of the whole thing, but in the end, we're talking about matters of taste. This isn't like an ethical dilemma. This isn't, something to go on a rant and insult people over, using the bully pulpit of his radio station.
Yeah, I don't know if you added in the list of quotes from Cowherd. One of them that I read was that he said if he ever has to cover video games, he will quit his job at ESPN. I'd like to see them call him on that bluff and see if it's true. I'm guessing he'll change his tune, but what do I know? That said, I agree with you, John. I like listening to Cowherd. Like I said, during football season, especially if I'm in the car, I'm gonna flip on ESPN radio and I'm gonna listen to him in the afternoons. One of the cool things I remember I heard him say a while back was how he doesn't cover games, he doesn't cover the scores, he covers topics. He talks about sports in a way that is a little bit more interesting than just recapping the box scores, and I always enjoyed that about his, his radio show. That said, again, on this particular topic, he's just flat wrong, and that's just a function of him, like I said, being a self-absorbed crazy person sometimes.
Well, let's give him credit, because we're talking about him on this podcast, and a lot of other podcasts are talking about him, and he's going to get some viewers just from this, from doing a hot take and being an idiot. He's kind of increased his exposure somewhat, which I imagine is important on a radio program that is, about 30 years past its ideal time.
Do we need to check with our lawyer about all the insults we've slung at Colin Cowherd throughout this segment of the podcast?
We may. If you guys don't hear this podcast next week, it's because Colin Cowherd shut us down, and we'll provide his address on our website. Let's move on. Let's do a segment. This is our segment time. Every week we do a segment, and today we're going to talk about Heroes of the Storm. The open beta was released a week ago Tuesday. The game launches officially on June 2nd, but honestly, the game is launched. Nothing is going to change between now and then, except maybe they might launch with a new hero. But, we've spent a good bit of time trying this game out, and that's a little bit of an underestimate there, and we'll get to gameplay, but for now, let's explain to our audience what the game and what a MOBA is. Let's start with Bill.
Right, so MOBA stands for Multiplayer Online Battle Arena, and it has a relatively new history within the gaming scene, and it basically encompasses its own sort of genre. Its own game style, in the same way that RTS or a real-time sim or an FPS or first-person shooter is a specific style of game. This is its own style of game. It really has its origins from Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne, where it was sort of a mini-game that was added into the campaign, where you'd take control of an individual hero from the RTS aspect of the game, and sort of, instead of controlling the whole army and managing a variety of units and it becoming like a real click fest in terms of your multitasking skills, it was more of somewhat similar to maybe the Diablos or sort of an MMORPG light, and controlling characters such as Rexar, Rokan, Cairn Bloodhoof, Chen Stormstout, the Pandaren Brewmaster. All of these characters, added to this Blizzard lore that's been created and enriched throughout their own success between the Warcraft titles, the Diablo titles, etc. And that's really where Heroes of the Storm comes from, is that style of game design. Now, we've seen Dota, Dota 2, which both directly came as a result of the Warcraft 3 minigame that I described. And then, of course, we have the wildly successful League of Legends, which, they'd be the giant in this discussion. But Heroes of the Storm brings something novel because they're bringing their own IP into existence, from an established base.
Blizzard doesn't miss the mark on many of its games, and it's kind of trying to correct its path by releasing this one, in that it totally let a genre of game that was created with its own tool set be profitized by League of Legends and Dota. and those are still going to be the giants in the marketplace, and they're going to play catch up. But to me, I'm happy to see that they're kind of getting back into it. It's nice to see the people that originated a genre be able to tap into that.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. One point I want to add here: the original version of this MOBA game style, which was Dark, what was it? Dota, I forget what it stands for, something of the Ancients or whatever. That was just a mod developed by the community, wasn't it?
It was.
That's interesting because, I don't know, we had a topic in one of the previous episodes about whether or not mod developers should be able to, be compensated and monetize the tools and the mods that they develop. And, this is a case where a mod that somebody developed became a brand new, wildly successful game genre in and of itself.
Yeah. Dota does stand for Defense of the Ancients, and the exact origin of that was the Frozen Throne expansion of Warcraft 3.
For those of our listeners who might be, truly ignorant to what we're talking about in terms of the game style, these sort of games really focus on a PvP aspect that's streamlined and simplified, so that basically you can either join with a group of strangers, 1 through 4 other strangers, or in some cases even playing alongside an artificial intelligence comprising the rest of your team against other people or against other AI online. And it's meant to last, maybe 15 to 30 minutes or so, and be a player versus player challenge.
Let's dive in a little bit to the game itself, Blizzard's Heroes of the Storm. They are using their entire lore base for this game, meaning they're using StarCraft, they're using World of Warcraft, they're using Diablo, and then they've got a couple offshoots. Let's talk a little bit about their character design, whether that's the aesthetic or the mechanical aspect of that. And let's start with Guy.
The characters in the game, I believe there's 32, 36, something like that. Of all of them, I've had a chance to play 10 now in the last few days that I've been playing the game since going into open beta. And they really didn't miss the mark on many of them. I mean, really, there was only one that I didn't enjoy the gameplay mode of, but the rest of them were all really done quite well. Bill and I spoke about this a little bit, and whether or not the aesthetic of the character is important to you. To me, it's not really. I'm not too worried about whether the aesthetic of the character is pleasing to me. It's kind of like, if I was a NASCAR race driver, would I care if they said tomorrow I have to have a Home Depot logo on my car instead of a Lowe's logo? No, it's just a paint job. I don't care. That's sort of how I feel about the skin, quote unquote, of the character that I'm playing. I'm more interested in the toolkit, the skills that the characters have. And I mean, 9 out of the 10 that I've played, I really enjoyed quite a bit. Some more than others, but I haven't really seen a terrible, terrible example of a character yet. So that's really promising, and I'm definitely looking forward to trying out all of the other characters as they A, become free, or B, I earn enough in-game currency to purchase new characters.
Now, see, the aesthetic actually is kind of important to me, and this is where Blizzard has struck a chord with me personally. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not like they're pulling these characters straight out of classical mythology or through some well-established literature or comic book franchise. It's their own IP. It's their own characters that they've established through the success of their previous video games. However, as having been a fan of pretty much all of these video games on one level or another, I've grown a familiarity, a comfort level with these characters that lets me enjoy playing this game a lot more just from the aesthetic point of view than I did League of Legends. Now, in the example of League of Legends, they basically created all their own characters, all their own mythos directly, with the release of the characters within the context of that game itself. And to me, you made the comparison about the NASCAR. I think back to some bad video game football games of yesteryear where the NFL license wasn't owned, or the NFL Players Association didn't sign off on the football game, and you would not either A, not have the actual team logos or team names, or B, sometimes not have the actual player names within the context of the game. Now, the actual gameplay, we're not talking about that. That might have been great. It might have been terrible. But to me, I just lost the sense of immersion. It ruined something for me to, have to see an entire football league filled with fake teams and constructed player names, for that purpose. And to me, that's exactly why I'm enjoying Heroes of the Storm, is because I have this comfort and familiarity with their characters and their IP.
You know, I congratulated Blizzard on tapping into a genre that they kind of helped found. But what is kind of entertaining to me in a really nerdy way is the fact that they've really prided themselves on story. Their StarCraft series has a story. Their World of Warcraft series has a story. Even Diablo makes the pretense of having a story that you complete over and over and over again. With this, it's kind of interesting because all of these characters are supposed to be interacting with each other. And I saw a comic strip the other day with, kind of making fun of that. Like, how is this even possible? Are they just abandoning the story here? Do you think they're going to even try to address it?
No, I was under the impression that there was no lore or pretense whatsoever. And like, did you think they were trying to make some sort of reasonable explanation as to why Raynor from StarCraft is fighting on the same battlefield as Thrall from World of Warcraft? I just got the impression that if there was no canon being followed here, there's no storyline. It's just a fun game to jump in and beat up the enemy team.
This is a necessity, being the mother of invention, I think. I mean, what we're having is they need to fill a roster of character slots in order to make a game that is pleasing and competitive with League of Legends and Dota. And if they were to either A, restrict themselves to one specific IP for the purposes of not shattering that immersion and, keeping all the Diablo characters together or keeping all the World of Warcraft characters together, it doesn't leave them with a robust selection of characters to play. So, we make a little leap of faith. We make a little, ignore the man behind the curtain kind of thing, and we have fun with the hybridization of these different character sets.
Yeah, I've never really found their storylines to be very engaging to begin with, so it definitely doesn't matter to me. But I read the Reddit subreddit for Heroes of the Storm, and it's funny because there are people that are trying to find a excuse for this to make sense within the canon. It's almost like a kid that drops their father's favorite glass and is, very nervously trying to put each piece of glass back together.
Is there something you'd like to talk about, John?
Yeah, I dropped my father's glass when I was a young kid. Let's move on. Let's talk about a little bit of an old-fashioned pros and cons list about this game that we've played too much in the last week. Let's start out positive by giving some of the high points of the game. Let's start with Guy.
I mean, given the way that we usually start things off, we should probably start with the negative, but, I'll try to go the other direction this time. Positives, I mean, the game is just done well, It's a high-quality game. The graphics are great. The gameplay is good. It's funny, when we first jumped into it, I was like, man, this feels slow compared to League of Legends, but, I'm finding that I really actually like the speed and pacing of everything. It works out really good. Games are not, super long. They don't last 45, 50, 60 minutes, 15, 20, 25 minutes, and the game's over. You can move on to the next one or call it a day. In my mind, it's mostly positive.
Yeah, in talking about the positives, I'm going to agree with you. And I mentioned this already, but I think that the IP being familiar to gamers is a very big selling point to it. I think it's got a lot of interesting character designs and the way the heroes work. A couple that are completely novel that I haven't seen used in, say, League of Legends before, but they're also not unafraid to cannibalize effective designs from League of Legends. Not necessarily entirely and explicitly, but you might see, different things taken off the shelf and from League of Legends and used, from multiple different characters in League of Legends and then put into a single hero within Heroes of the Storm. On top of that, I think there's, you mentioned the pacing. On one hand, the actual, the frenzied nature of PvP is slower paced, as you seem to imply, but the overall game is quicker paced, as you also mentioned. The games are faster, it doesn't drag on as long. The laning phase, the early phase of the game, transitions a lot quicker into sort of an end game strategy. There aren't carries in the game, and to those not familiar with the term, basically League of Legends allows for a single character of the team to, by design, become much more powerful than everyone else on the team, and that isn't really the case at all in this. Basically, the entire team levels up along the same steady curve at the same rate, and everybody gains power relative to the strength of the character design in the first place, and I find that makes it feel a lot more fun because you never feel marginalized by a particular player on your team. You can't really like put yourself out of the game by maybe a couple early failures. It's a lot more noob friendly, if I'm being honest. But it's also, I think, it's a lot more strategic because of the variance of the map minigames, where there's, 5, 6, 7 different maps, and each one has its own sort of minigame going on that helps you win. And I mean, in many cases, is outright required for victory. And I think that adds a whole new element to the to this genre of games, and it's done really well with it. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, I just want to touch on the thing you mentioned about it being a more team-focused game. And one of the things that we are, as a group of players, still not doing a good job of is paying enough attention to the map objectives. So in the other established entries into this genre, it's almost like you're not a team until halfway through the game. You just ignore each other, basically, on different sides of the map and kind of do your own thing. In this game, the maps are making you get together, and they're making you run into the other team and fight over objectives that you can't ignore and win. So that's a big plus to me. It's much more dynamic. There is a much greater potential for a comeback, which is not at all present in the other entries in this genre. Gotta get any more positives, or you may let you talk about some negatives?
I want to get negative on this mofo.
All right, get negative, man. Go.
So you guys are talking about the, map objectives. I kind of call them the mini game within the game, and this is kind of a negative for me. I'm not super sold on them yet. Any of them, really. I mean, I see what they do. You're right. They bring the teams together earlier in the match, and that's a good thing, but I don't really want to go collect doubloons or random little skull items in the mines. I don't know. I'm not enjoying the fact that it's really turning the game that is solidly a PvP game into somewhat of a player versus environment or PvE game in that regard. I think that it's still a little bit of a negative for me.
I'm not going to say I don't see your point, and it's certainly more present in this than it was in League of Legends. But that said, I agree with John. I like the fact that it drives the game, it drives the strategy. They are important, they can't be ignored, and it does, herd you into certain map sectors at different points in the game. And I mean, maybe I'm just gonna, theorize on your negativity about this, but there's certainly a learning curve in understanding how these map mechanics work as you're going along. And when you're busy learning a new hero and you're acclimating yourself to the game for the first time, understanding the map mechanics isn't necessarily the first thing to come along in your understanding. And I think, and I don't mean you specifically, but any person. And I think that probably adds to some of the negativity. In terms of my own, if I'm going to point out some things that I think are flaws in the game, I mean, I think the first thing is the hero selection. While it's familiar from the previous titles, it's also a little bit short-staffed at the time. And I suppose that's just, a fair criticism, but it's to be expected given the fact that it's new. It's, still in an open beta, at least until June 2nd when it's officially released. And I think the other thing that I might point out as a flaw is possibly the economy. And by that, I mean the means by which you acquire new heroes for your personal stable, the earning of in-game currency, gold. I think it feels a little bit on the tight side compared to League of Legends. In League of Legends, I remember, it seemed like you'd earn a new hero, maybe once a week if you played regularly.
So, there's a couple things that people that have really been invested in this genre have pointed out. And the first one is there is a lack of crispness to the controls. It's a little bit looser. You might not fire something in as straight of a line as you might expect, or the line might be wider, or your cast time might be slower. So there's that. That's definitely a con. I think that the biggest con that people are going to find about this game is it is much more strategic and much less individual skill.
Well, I mean, some people might call that a con, and some people might call that a benefit. Personally, I favor that sort of play. I favor, the team that plays tightly together, the team that plays smarter. I mean, maybe I'm just being closed-minded and I'm focusing on my own shortcomings, but I mean, my personal twitch reflexes at this point in my life aren't the greatest, but my mind is still pretty damn sharp, and I'd like to think that, being able to succeed based on that strength, I prefer games that have that as an aspect.
Another big negative for me, and I'm not sure how their matchmaking system works, but you pick your hero and then you say enter queue, and you're thrown into a match with 4 other people, and you don't have the opportunity to see what other people are going to play and try to form a good composition, a good team. Like you would say in League of Legends, you have sort of like a pre-game segment of time, 60 seconds or whatever it is, that you get to pick your heroes. And even in a completely public match where, nobody knows anybody, generally speaking, you can work out who's going to play the right characters to, have the best chance of winning. That's just totally absent here. Now, it's theorized that the matchmaker tries to put together a good team composition for you by, giving you the appropriate roles, be it DPS or healers or tanks or whatever. But, it seems to me that after maybe a minute to a minute and a half of waiting, the matchmaker just says, screw it, I'm not going to make you wait any longer, and they throw you into a random match with 4 other random characters. So what this ends up meaning is that you end up in a very poorly comprised team, and generally speaking, it's been my experience that when I play alone, I don't have any fun. And it's not because I'm playing in a pug match with 4 random people, because I do that in League of Legends quite a bit, and I can still have a good time there. In this game, it's just very hard to have a good time playing by yourself.
Yeah, let me clarify something for those that maybe aren't as familiar with this game type. So what Guy's talking about in terms of composition is you have different characters that get slotted into some very fundamental roles. You have your damage dealers, both melee and ranged. You have your tanks, which are essentially your damage sponges. You have your healers, which keep the hit points topped off. And then they've added these new specialist classes, which are really designed to push a lane and destroy the PvE content a lot more effectively. And the ideal team will not be lopsided or devoid of some of the more important roles, and without the ability to sort of construct this with full knowledge of what your teammates are playing ahead of time, it could very often leave you with a severely unbalanced team that leaves you at a disadvantage right from the get-go.
We talk more about the negatives of things than the positives of things on this podcast, and it's just an aspect of our characters. But the truth is, we're all playing the hell out of this game. Like, we're playing quite a bit, and there are way more pros than cons. I definitely recommend people trying this out, even if you've never played a MOBA before. This is a good one to start with. It's easier to get started on. You're not behind the curve to any real extent. And, with that in mind, I'd like to give a little bit of new player advice, maybe just one thing from each person that we would, say to someone that hasn't played the genre before that would really help them. And mine, I'm going to tell you to spend your money wisely. Okay, so it's a free-to-play game. You don't have to spend $1. But you can buy what's called a boost, and the boost is going to increase your experience and gold. And I want to say that it's around 150% for each. I think it actually may be 100% for one and 150% for the other. But I have found that that is all that I needed to spend money on. And after buying that boost, 1, I'm able to level my characters more quickly, and 2, I'm getting enough gold to be able to buy characters without paying cash for them.
Yeah, I would probably tack onto that if I'm going to recommend one thing, and I probably have a couple ideas. We'll see what Guy has to say. But the one thing I'd suggest is, do spend the money. The starter pack and the Nexus pack are both pretty good values. The starter pack is $5, and it comes with 3 different heroes, and it comes with one of these boosts. And considering that, for the most part, any hero individually costs somewhere between, maybe $7 and $10 each. Getting 3 for $5, and they're 3 pretty decent heroes, is a pretty good deal. The other pack, it's the Nexus pack, I believe, and it just comes with a lot of heroes. It's I want to say it's a $40 thing, which, in terms of paying for a video game, a lot of us are accustomed to dropping $30, $40, $50, $60 on a single video game. So to drop 40 and get a large amount of heroes, and I forget the exact amount, in one fell swoop, along with a couple alternate mounts, a couple different variant skins for some of the characters that you have. I think that they're both potentially good options depending on what your personal directive in terms of investment is going to be.
I think the best piece of advice I could give anybody that's starting this game is play all the heroes. Every week there's 5, 6, or 7, depending on how high of a level you are, free heroes that you can play, and that rotation, as I said, changes weekly. Play each character, 2, 4, maybe 6 games at least, and get an idea of how they work. Knowing how the characters function that you're playing against is going to make you a much better player. Don't just play that one character that you find that you enjoy all the time. Play them all. Get to know.
The last thing that I would want to kind of point out to a new player, and this is strictly for someone that hasn't played the genre before, is that it is more important to be alive. And you're going to want to go in and try to get some kills on some other players. But until you know what your character is capable of compared to the character that you're fighting, you're maybe not going to have the best idea about when it's time to go all in. And it's a better idea to either stay with a teammate and kind of play off of them than kind of dive in and die over and over again in these games.
Yeah, I think that's all like some really good advice. 2 quick things that I would add to that, and one is to expand on what Guy said. Specifically, making it to level 5 with all of the free heroes earns you 500 gold per hero that you do this with, and considering that every week there's a rotation of, as he mentioned, 5, 6, 7 different heroes you can do this with, this means you at least until you max out level 5 on all the heroes in the game, that means you can earn 500 gold times 5, 6, 7, and 2,500 gold a week plus, just from getting the heroes to level 5, and at the same time you'll also learn how they work, as Guy mentioned. And the last thought I'd really want to add, and in a way this should be one of the most obvious things, because on some level it applies to almost any multiplayer game, play with friends. Number one, there's a specific benefit into it, and that's that you get a 50% bonus to your gold and XP gain. But the other thing is that it's more fun. I mean, these are multiplayer games. They're social games. In the end, it's this sort of thing that how I met Guy and John. It's how we met each other. So, play with friends. If you don't have any friends that are interested in it, make some friends. Reach out, talk to people, and make it a social experiment. You never know what can come of it.
Yep, that's a great point. Every game is more fun if you're playing with people you like talking to and you don't feel so alone when you're losing. It's kind of nice to have some support there. Let's wrap for today. We've covered Here's of the Storm. We've done some news. Next week, our segment is going to be on something that might have been a little confusing. We're going to talk about alphas and betas and open betas and what that kind of means in the gaming world. For example, the open beta for the Here's the Storm is ongoing right now. What does that even mean? We're going to talk about that next week, and we're going to, of course, do the news. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, follow us on iTunes, follow us on SoundCloud or Stitcher, and, leave reviews. It helps us a lot. We need to know what we're doing right and, what we're doing wrong. If you really want to write an in-depth negative review of us instead, why don't you, shave your feet or something. But, thanks for listening to the Nerd Goblin podcast.